Okay, let's dive into a classic story that helps us understand a massive idea: how an invisible empire can shape a person's soul without ever firing a shot. And we're going to see it all through the eyes of one young boy.
So, meet Swami. On the surface, he's pretty much like any other 10-year-old. He lives in this little town called Malgudi. He worries about his homework, and he loves playing with his friends. You'd think his world is pretty simple, right?
But it's not. See, looming over everything in his life, there's this huge invisible force: the British Empire. This isn't really a story about big battles or politics. It's about how that power trickles down and literally changes the air a child breathes. Because in a place like Malgudi, colonialism wasn't just a government system. No, it was more like an atmosphere. It was the silent judge all around them that was constantly deciding what was important, what was modern, and what was civilized. And you can see this play out in the most surprising place: a kid's game. For Swami and his friends, cricket wasn't just a sport they played for fun. It was a full-on performance. So why this obsession with being proper? I mean, they didn't just want to play well. They wanted to play like the English. Why on earth did that matter so much to a bunch of kids in a small Indian town? Well, the answer tells you everything about the psychology of colonial rule. The key idea here is something called mimicry. It's this powerful and often totally unconscious drive to copy the colonizer. It's this complicated mix of admiration and this deep down belief that, hey, if they can just act English and speak English and use English things, maybe they'll get a piece of that power and status for themselves. And this just illustrates it perfectly. I mean, look at these details. They name their club the MCC, which is a direct copy of the famous cricket club in London. They obsess over getting these specific brand name English bats. They worry about using just the right slang. The whole game is about mastering the imitation. And the king of all this, the master of the art, was a boy named Rajam. He was the kid everyone looked up to because, well, he was the best mimic. He spoke perfect English. He wore Western-style socks and shoes, a big deal, and he just carried himself with this authority that seemed, well, British. Now, this pressure to conform, it wasn't just happening on the playground. It was being formalized, it was systemized, and it was taught every single day inside the walls of his school, the Albert Mission School. Think about this split for a second. At home, Swami's world is filled with his local river, the Saryu, his grandmother's Hindu stories, his native language, Tamil. But at school, he's taught that the really important river is the Thames in England, the really important stories are from the Bible, and the only really important language is English. His own world is basically treated as irrelevant. And this wasn't some gentle suggestion either. The colonial education system could be a direct assault on local culture. You had teachers like Mr. Ebenezer who were actively telling students like Swami that their own heritage, their own religion was inferior, something to be ashamed of. So this brings us to another huge idea: hegemony. This is power that doesn't need soldiers in the streets to work. It works by making the colonizer's worldview seem like the natural, normal, just default way of thinking. The school system was the engine driving that power. So with all this pressure, you'd think Swami might fight back. And he does try. He gets swept up in the Indian independence movement and decides he's going to be a rebel. But his rebellion, it's messy, it's confused, and it's actually pretty ironic. So here's what goes down. In this one moment of pure passion during a protest, he grabs a rock and smashes a window at his own school, the very symbol of that colonial authority. Then, for his grand finale, he throws his cap into a bonfire of foreign goods. And here's the kicker. He finds out later that the cap he so proudly burned as a symbol of foreign oppression was actually made in India. His big act of nationalism was based on total confusion, which just goes to show how mixed up his identity had become. At the end of the day, his rebellion accomplishes nothing. He gets expelled from school, he gets pushed to the edges of his own community. What the story shows us is that for an ordinary person, trying to fight that system often just means breaking yourself against it. The system is just too strong. So where does all this leave Swami? Well, he's basically in a state of permanent displacement. He's been taught to reject his own culture, but he can never, ever truly be part of the colonizer's world. He is a product of these two conflicting forces, belonging to neither. So let's just pull all these threads together.
We saw mimicry, right? The boys copying the English cricketers to feel important. That was made possible by hegemony, the school system that taught them English culture was just better. This leads to othering, where Swami starts to feel ashamed of his own roots, like his grandmother's stories. And the final result of all of this is hybridity. Swami is left with this mixed-up identity caught between two cultures and not really at home in either one.
The whole story comes down to this one really powerful final image. Rajam, the boy who is the symbol of that modern English colonial world, he just gets on a train and leaves. He's moving on. His world keeps going. But Swami gets left behind on the platform.
And what's he holding in that moment? A book of English fairy tales. It is the perfect, heartbreaking symbol for his situation. He's literally clutching onto a culture that has shaped him, that has fascinated him, and that has ultimately rejected him, a culture that will never truly love him back. Swami's story took place under a political empire, sure, but it leaves us with a really important question for today. What are the invisible empires now? The empires of global culture, of social media, of technology? How do they teach us what to value, what to want, what to imitate, and maybe what parts of ourselves to leave behind on the platform?